Hey everybody, this is John Eric Bentley, the voice of Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII, the remake, so many other projects, and more importantly, you are listening to Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mikhail Kasanova, and I have the honor and privilege of interviewing the one, the only Giselle. She's creator relations for Logitech G. Giselle, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Awesome. It's an honor having you on. And how's your day been so far?
Busy as always. I feel like that's my standard response, but especially working in gaming, you know, we're always working on something.
True. That's very, very true. So if you don't mind doing an introduction for yourself and telling people where they can find you and plug everything. Like don't leave any stone unturned. Plug everything.
Okay. Well, I am Giselle Sturdevant. My pronouns are she and her. I am, as Mikhail said, the creator relations manager for Logitech G. I've been with the company now for about 3.5 years. Originally started more on the social media side, but have transitioned to specializing in the creator relations over the last 7 months or so. So I am also a streamer, but it's very much part-time because I really look at streaming as a way for me to better understand what content creators are going through. So it makes me better at my job. My handle is GG Firefly. That is also my handle for Twitter. And I am ggfirefly.tv on Instagram.
Awesome. So one of the things like I definitely want to dive into is like gaming. Like what got you into gaming? Like what was that point where, you know, that memory or the instance where you played a game and it's like, yeah, I love this and I want to keep playing games going forward? I
feel like there are so many of those memories. I am a lifelong gamer. That is first and foremost how I describe myself. My first gaming system was actually an Atari that my mom got for me at a garage sale because she loves going to garage sales. It didn't work very long. I mean, that's part of the reason they were probably selling it, is that it would go in and out. But it was definitely something that I always really enjoyed, you know, going to the movie theater and playing arcade games before a movie started or after the movies. For me, the first system that was truly my system that got me into gaming was a Sega Genesis that I got for my 7th birthday from my grandparents. I got it. They let me open it the night before my birthday party, which was very, very sweet because we went out to dinner with them and it was really special. And it was also really special that it was what they got me for my birthday. Sonic the Hedgehog was my game of choice, but I also really loved all of the Disney games as well, which I think, you know, still hold up now. I plug in my Sega emulator and I still have a working Sega Genesis and some of those Disney games, and still playing those every once in a while just for the nostalgia aspect of it is something that I really enjoy. So really happy that I can still do that. Chuck Rock 2, Son of Chuck Rock was another early game that I played. I know I have to drop in those old games. Like if you know, you know, like there are some games and, there's so many games like that. I think after Sega Genesis, it was really PlayStation. PlayStation was the next jumping off point. And for me, it was really Tomb Raider. I am one of the biggest Tomb Raider fans, and it was really Tomb Raider 2 that got me to the PlayStation because, one, I loved playing as a female. I loved playing as a female character and running around and fighting artifacts and bad guys. And, you know, the idea of, you know, with Tomb Raider 2, starting in China, then going to Venice and progressing through these, you know, real world locations tied in really nicely to the fact that I also really like to travel. And so, you know, when I now get to go to places like that, it definitely brings me back to that little kid moment, and I run around pretending to be Tomb Raider a little bit. But that was one of those games where it was such a magical moment because I really saw myself in the game. Which with, the Disney games, they were great to play, but you always, were seeing the Disney character. You weren't necessarily seeing yourself. Yeah. And so with Tomb Raider, I really saw myself in the game. Mm-hmm. And then from Tomb Raider, I feel like I'm going to just go through all my favorite franchises at this point. Do it. Moving to the Xbox, I would be remiss without talking about Halo. I mean, Halo from an FPS perspective was really the first FPS game that I played. And it was not very good. And I was playing on console because, at that point, console was king compared to PC. PC, was definitely something that I did play, but not as much of. The Sims was really my go-to PC game. I wasn't a big Counter-Strike fan. I was more, it was too chaotic in a sense because you were playing with people you didn't know. And if you weren't very good, it was kind of harder to jump into for me. Yeah. But played a lot of The Sims, still play The Sims. The Sims 3 has been my latest kind of chill game that I've been playing. But going back to Halo was the first FPS game on a console that I got really into. And it was because I was playing with my friends. I mean, this is pre-Xbox Live days. This is get the Ethernet, have an Xbox party with, a couple systems, a couple TVs. And we did that. And I was one of the only girls that really seriously played. There were a couple other girls that I hung out with that played, but they weren't as into it. So for me, that was really the game from the FPS, but also the party aspect of it. And then going to college, again, it was Halo 2, and we had 3 different houses that all had Xbox systems. And at that point, we had Xbox Live, and we would all have accounts, and we'd all be playing. And, I got to throw it back to shotties and energy swords. I practiced an entire summer with shotties and energy sword to get better so that I could hold my own against them. But I was one of the only girls that did. And again, it's those memories to me that are so great because, one, it's a great experience that I had because it was such a positive environment. There was no, toxicity because I was a girl playing. It was all my guy friends that just loved that I was playing with them. So I think those are kind of like the really big kind of gaming moments for me that always reinforced why I loved gaming. And now I feel very privileged that I get to work in the gaming industry.
Isn't it surreal?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've had this conversation with my friend Andrew Alliance before, where it's like growing up with gaming and how like people were like, oh, there's no way you're gonna have a career in that. Like there's no future in that, and it's like the biggest industry now. That is
exactly what my mom told me. She was, and she'll laugh at me, and she fully admits this now, but that was one of the things. I wanted to stay home and play video games. I mean, again, throwing it back to other franchises, I love Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 7 and 9 are probably 2 of my favorite. I cried at the end of Final Fantasy 10 because I was so upset because I was like, he's not supposed to die. They're never supposed to die at the end. Like, I was so upset at the end of that. But she was always worried I was playing too many video games. And it was so funny because I was a good kid, and I wasn't a straight A student, but I was an A student. And she was just worried, what are you doing? This is not going to translate to a career or a job or anything like that. Because at the time, gaming was not taken seriously. And, the idea of going into that for a career wasn't something that, most parents really thought of for their kids. And it's so funny now because I can remember my second grade teacher, saying 50% of you in this classroom will have jobs that are not created as of right now. And I really feel like that is the role that I inhabit, not only from a social media space, but from creator relations for gaming, because the idea of streaming, of Twitch was something, when we were kids just didn't exist. Yeah. And honestly, my resume before working at Logitech G didn't include any gaming from a professional level. I didn't intern with studios. It's gotten better, but I would say it was increasingly hard to get your foot in the door. Talking 10 or so years ago, it wasn't an easy career to follow unless you were a game developer. And now I think that's changing because we do have content creators and we do have social media management and we do have a lot of other things that give you those avenues in. But even when I applied for my job with Logitech G, when I was first starting out, one of the questions I always like to ask at the end of interviews is there anything on my resume that you would like me to address that I haven't? And the person that was interviewing me, who previously worked at Microsoft, who I really credit with kind of giving me my foot in the door, was, he asked, there's nothing on your resume I'd like you to address, but I do have to ask, why gaming? And that one question for me was my avenue to be able to talk about the experiences that I've had in gaming, because those experiences do put you in touch with what is going on. It is very much, you're a part of that culture. You understand it in a way that if you don't have that experience, it's harder to pick up on. So okay. I would say, for anyone listening who is passionate about gaming, but doesn't feel like they have that experience, put it as one of your interests on your resume, because sometimes even someone seeing that you're interested in video games, it gives them an avenue to talk to you about. And even though it's not a professional career experience, your experience playing games, enjoying them, being a part of those communities is valuable experience. Definitely.
There's a couple things you said that I definitely want to dive into. One being like your professional and personal background, but also two other things you said that just, okay, Final Fantasy X, absolutely love it. So I have a personal history of Final Fantasy because like I'm originally from Western Samoa and English is like not my first language. So when we moved to the United States and I had to learn English, the first RPG that my mom got me, because I was just that rebellious kid that just didn't want to read. So she got me Final Fantasy VII. And that drew me in. And just because I was like, my English at the time wasn't that great. So I was like, okay, I need to get better at reading and speaking English so I can understand this and talk to like the other kids at the school that were playing it too.
That game, I love that game. That game is what got me into Final Fantasy VII. And again, it's one of those games. There are a couple games where it's like every year or two, I have to go back and play them. Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy IX are probably in my top 5 of every once in a while, I have to go back and play those games. I did a run of Final Fantasy IX earlier on stream late last year and did the full playthrough and did it with the Magiri mod so that the graphics were updated and everything. And it was almost playing it with fresh eyes in the sense that it was amazing to be able to see how much they had changed. And I loved that. And I mean, there were definitely, I ended up doing basically 2 playthroughs of that game because I had my stream playthrough. And then there was one day where I was like, I want to just sit here and reset until I get all of these items, because you have to steal the items from, the bosses if you want to get that little edge and things like that. So I ended up doing basically 2 simultaneous playthroughs at once. But those games to me, the narrative holds up. I mean, even though the graphics, are at the time they were phenomenal, but are clearly dated now. I just absolutely love them for the story, because I think that is something that is just timeless. If you tell a good story, I mean, it's the reason why we have so many remakes of classic literature and movies. There's the reason we have, people want to revisit certain stories is because that narrative is so enchanting and just pulls you in a way that other things don't all the time.
Yeah. especially Final Fantasy 9. That world is just so magical. Like it for me, like, so I played Final Fantasy 7, and then I think we got the anthology, which I think that was 5 and 6. So I ended up playing 6, then I played 8, and 8 was hard for me to get into just because of the whole junctioning system.
I'm not a fan of 8. For that reason, I loved the materia setup of 7.
Yeah.
And to go to 8, there was also something about the story that wasn't as captivating to me. I'll go and revisit it every once in a while just because I do really love the card game in 8.
Oh,
the card game is
so
why you play
good.
8. The card game is why you play 8. I like the card game in 9, but let's face it, it's better in 8.
Yeah. Yeah. And like going from like 8 to 9 just was, Zidane was such a lovable character. Like, no offense to Squall, but I just felt he was just such an edgelord. Like, he didn't have the charm of Cloud. He was just trying so hard, and then that whole, the whole thing with him and Renoa that happened where he starts to embrace his feelings and whatnot. I was like, okay, but you're still a jerk. You're not Cloud.
I feel, yeah, exactly. Like, Cloud had some redeeming features about him where it was just like you realized he was actually, as a kid bullied and wasn't this big, strong alpha character. And so he has some, scars from that.
Yeah.
And, Tifa was a childhood friend who he made this promise to come back. And then, the idea of, is he a clone or is he not? Like, that whole thing, because then you start to question, what is true, what is not? And I'm very excited for the remake. I played the remake. I'm very excited with what they did, but that is a separate conversation in the sense of like changes between the original and the remake, but not to sideline from the Final Fantasy discussion. With 9, I loved that Zidane was very much not the classic hero and not a tragic hero, but he was much more of a rogue. He was, I liken Final Fantasy 9 to being very similar to Firefly. So if you're familiar with Firefly, I honestly, I map basically all of the characters in Final Fantasy 9 to a Firefly character. So Zidane is Mal, because again, it's that, they're good at being the bad guy, so to speak. He's a thief. They're thieves. But they still have that moral compass. And, you look at for Garnet River running away from something with, Steiner as her big brother, Simon protector chasing after her. You look at, with Vivi. Vivi, I either go very book because very philosophical question of why are we here? Why do we exist? Why do I exist? Also, very much could map to Wash in that sense because he does provide some comic relief. Let me think who else. Freya, Zoe. Has to be Zoe. Let's face it. She's a Dragoon Knight. Like, she's this strong character. I love that. Iku, I go with either Kaylee or Inara. And then with Queen of Quinn, I typically will either go Book or Wash.
Okay.
So those two are kind of the interchangeable. I tend to go more Wash, just because one, I also feel like the name fits of like you're cooking, you wash dishes a lot, but also that just comedic relief that you need.
So what I've gathered from this is we could have an entire podcast about Firefly and Final Fantasy.
Yep.
Okay. One of the other things that you said that really caught my interest was in many, in recounting a lot of your gaming experiences growing up was, one, being able to, find a tangibility between yourself and Lara Croft and Tomb Raider, and also being able to, being pretty much, and correct me if I'm wrong, like the only female that was, or that was gaming at the time around others.
She was revolutionary. I mean, so many people have said that Lara Croft was revolutionary, and I think that credit is really well deserved because there were definitely other strong female characters You know, you look at Samus Aran, but you didn't know Samus was female at the time. You look at, you know, some of the more not obscure games, but not quite as pop culture relevant games. And that to me is why Lara Croft is so enduring, because you look at how many different games, how many different live action, you know, models have played her, how many voice actresses, how many motion pictures have we gotten. Huge fan of Angelina Jolie and Alicia Vikander. I think, you know, two very different takes on the character, and I appreciate both of them so much. And so for me, I just appreciate how much she has the staying power and has really kind of changed the way we talk about female characters and narratives in games. Because I don't really think at any point in those games she's, you know, seen as a character that is weaker than because she is female. And to me, it almost feels, I don't want to say inconsequential, because I think there was a lot tied to her being female and being strong and powerful, but it's not done in a way that is pandering to me. And I know that obviously when we discuss her character design, there are different philosophies on why certain things were done. But I also, you know, appreciate that they celebrated her femininity in that sense. So, you know, looking at the earlier iterations of her to later, I love the direction that they've taken, but I also appreciate where she's come from.
And speaking of that, like looking at the way that, you know, gaming has progressed, like the industry as a whole, do you feel that there's better representation of female characters in gaming, both in visual representation as well as in moving away from the damsel in distress, you know, iconography to where it is now, where, you know, they're on equal footing with a lot of the male representatives or male characters that are in gaming?
I think it's definitely getting better. I don't think that I don't think anything is ever going to be perfect representation, but I think that there are a lot of really big strides to improve the representation that we see from a gender perspective, but also from a sexuality perspective, from an ethnicity perspective. You know, I look at games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age as being great examples. Oh, I see. We could have a whole other podcast just talking about Dragon Age. I did a Dragon Age Inquisition playthrough on stream earlier this year. Ooh. And so for me, I love games where you have the ability to create your character. I love that aspect of, because again, it's putting you into the game in the way that, you know, those earlier games and having that early representation really did. And now you're getting to craft your character. You can pick if you want to be, you know, I'm going to use Dragon Age as my example. You can be an elf, you can be a dwarf, you can be a human, you can be Qunari. And I think that that's so great, because not everybody identifies the same way. And with Dragon Age Inquisition 2, I will never, it's not perfect. I will say that. I'm going to preface this and say it's not perfect. But when you look at the representation in that game from an LGBTQIA perspective, they really did try, and they did it in ways that, again, it didn't feel as if it was hindering or if it was pandering. They really tried to explore different things that showed it is natural and it's a part of what makes you who you are. You know, one of my favorite characters in that game are Dorian and Iron Bull. And I love them so much, and I will never romance either one of them, because I love the narrative that, you know, here they are, these two basically conflicting nations. They're brought together by these circumstances, and they actually form a connection and a bond. And if you take them with you enough, you can unlock that they actually have a relationship. And I think that that is so great, because it does show, you know, from a preconceived notion perspective and representation, and how people, you know, do have those certain biases in real life, and certain people do overcome them and realize kind of, hey, I missed something, and finding that connection with that person that makes sense for them. And that to me was such a beautiful aspect of the story that I love that. Another character I love in that game that I really hope they bring back for the next one, because, you know, they've released the teaser. It seems like we're going to Tevinter. I'm very excited about that. One, I really hope we get Dorian, but I also hope we get Krem. Krem was such a great character because you got to see, you know, and hear from his perspective what it was like to grow up in a society that was not accepting of, not only was he non-magical, but born a female. He identifies as male, and exploring that and hearing the story, you know, you have the dialogue option to ask him, how long have you known? And he replies with, you know, I feel like I've always known. I feel like my dad knew. He would, you know, sit there and put shaving cream on my face and let me, you know, play shaving with him. And that to me was such a beautiful moment, because in a way it was normalizing a behavior that we do have and see in our society, and including that in a game in a way that felt like it didn't feel like it was a token aspect. And I felt like they actually did quite a bit of character development with Krem. So I really loved that. And then also having Iron Bull come in and say, you are a real man, you know, because they, in the Kyun society, they had accepted people that were trans. And that to me was, again, also such a great thing to see in the game.
I love your passion here, like, in describing all of this. And okay, I got to ask you, this is also an important question. Sidebar, but it's an important question. How did you feel about Dragon Age 2?
So here's an interesting one for you. Dragon Age Inquisition was actually my first entry into the franchise. So I've gone back and I've explored Dragon Age 2, not from a playing perspective, but from a lore perspective.
Okay.
I feel like with each iteration, they've gotten better. Same with Mass Effect. Because I've played Mass Effect 1 and 2. I refuse to play 3 because the ending is controversial, and I stand by my decision. I know a lot of people are like, no, you have to go back and play it. And I'm like, I'm waiting. I'm going to wait on that one. Maybe we're getting the remaster this year. Maybe I'll play it then. But going, like, sidebar on that. But yeah, so for me, I think with each Dragon Age, it's gotten progressively better. Which, you know, makes complete sense, because as the technology in gaming advances, you're able to do different things. You're able to have different representation, but you're also building off of each iteration to, you know, ideally improve and grow that entire world.
Okay. All right. So again, that could be a whole podcast right there about Dragon Age. I'm looking forward to that, you know, when we have you back on the show. So, diving into another area, because it's a very important thing to me, and I'm glad seeing it's also very important to you, is representation and inclusivity. Specifically narrowing it down to gaming, do you feel like there's been a lot of progress made, and what challenges do you think that we're still facing that we, you know, as a gaming community, that we need to eventually overcome or are working towards currently overcoming?
This is a two-part answer. I'm gonna preface that, and I'm gonna speak from my observations and experience. I completely acknowledge my privilege in the sense that I don't feel like I ever experienced the toxicity that I know a lot of other females in the gaming space have. So I feel very fortunate in that, because again, I was playing with friends from real life more than I was playing online. And so the trash talk was never because I was a girl. It was very much like, oh, you missed that shot. But they would say the exact same thing to the guy that was sitting next to me. So it was much more about how I was playing rather than the fact that I was a female. So again, I'm acknowledging that experience makes me very privileged that I didn't experience that. That being said, I have seen the toxicity. I haven't necessarily experienced, but I have seen it. I think there have been steps made, and I feel very fortunate to work for a company that wants to leave a positive impact on the gaming space and wants to be more inclusive and positive and grow that aspect of gaming. That being said, I feel like there is a ways to go on not just gender, but a multitude of areas when it comes to representation. So I think that, yes, we still have work to do. I think we can celebrate changes that have been made, but I still feel like we have a long way to go.
Okay. But the important thing is we're working towards it. That's
and exactly. It is. I think it is, very similar to other areas of life. It is good to celebrate the wins, and it is important to celebrate those wins because those wins are what keep us going. Because we still do have work to do, and I know for some people on different topics, whether I don't want to say that we keep things separate from each other because everything is very much intersectional, because your experience in one area is going to, affect your experience and your overall outlook in other areas as well. And so it's important to celebrate those small wins because those wins keep us going. But we do have to remember why we do the things that we do.
Exactly. Shifting topics back to you. So you may mention, about now you're in the gaming industry, but let's talk about like school, growing up. So your journey towards being where you are now with Logitech, like what was that journey like?
It, ironically was very much influenced by video games. I joke that I wanted to be the real life Tomb Raider. I wanted to be the real life Lara Croft. My background is actually in art history. Art history with a minor in classics. So studying art, studying sculpture, studying ancient history and ancient civilizations was very much what was part of my passion. And, that goes back to me being 8 years old, my mother and my grandfather taking me to Paris for the first time. And my mom jokes that she should have known I was going to go into art history or art in some way, shape, or form then, because I was 8 years old. And I was telling her very specifically, oh, I want to see this painting. And she's like, oh, what painting? And I said, Impression of a Sunrise by Monet. I was obsessed with Monet. He's still one of my favorite artists. And so she looked up where the painting was located, which museum we would need to go to. And she took me to the museum. And I was very excited. I'm like, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see the painting that was stolen. That changed something in the conversation. She's like, no, it wasn't stolen. And I'm like, yes, it was. And I was adamant that this painting had been stolen. And she's like, no, it's here. They have it. And I'm like, no, it was stolen and recovered. Like and again, I'm 8 years old. She's, she's thinking, what does my 8-year-old know? Like, clearly she's mistaken. And the fact that she didn't want to or couldn't process that I knew this fact was a sticking point for me, because I was like, no, I know I'm right. I'm 8 years old. Again, 8-year-olds don't understand the concept of inside voices very easily. So I'm practically having a shouting match with my mother about this in the middle of a museum. I'm sure there were people looking at us like, what is this crazy child doing? We finally get to the painting. I'm very irritated at this point because she refused to believe me. Sure enough, 2 armed guards, and it's behind plexiglass. And she's like, what is this? Reads the plaque. Sure enough, stolen in 1992, later recovered, was repaired after it incurred some small damage. And she just looks at me dumbfounded, because again, what parent expects their 8-year-old to know that much about a piece of art, let alone a particular artist? And I just looked at her, and I didn't scream this, but I was definitely loud, because again, 8-year-old inside voice didn't understand the concept. And I just go, I told you so. And so for me, I think Tomb Raider really reinforced my love of art and history and wanting to study it. and wanting to know more and wanting to be as smart as Lara Croft and be able to go around the world and know about these different cultures and different artifacts. And so I pursued art history. I was dead set on pursuing it. There was no other major really considered. And so for me, I graduated from UCLA, had a minor in classics. I did my first master's in art history as well, because originally I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go work at a museum. Because let's face it, what do you do with an art history degree? You work in a museum. You're like Indiana Jones. You know, this belongs in a museum. So I did my first master's, and I actually studied in London. Again, feeding into this idea that I was going to be the real life Lara Croft. And I love that experience, and I love that I got to do that abroad. And then after that, it was kind of I don't really want to work in a museum. I don't think that's right for me. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll go do art recovery for the FBI. And so I transitioned. I kind of took a year off, studied for the LSAT, went to law school for a year. In doing that, realized I didn't really want to work for the FBI, and I didn't really want to be a lawyer. So left law school after a year. But I joked it was the most expensive dating service I ever used, because I met my husband at the time through mutual friends who were also attending law school. So at that point, I kind of end up in Northern California. Wasn't going to be moving back home with my mom because, again, I'd gotten married. And so I started looking at different things that interested me. And one of them was social media. I was really, I loved Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I loved all of these different avenues because, again, it was how I connected with my friends while I was abroad, but it was also how I connected with gaming and people that had those similar interests. And so then I pursued my second master's in digital communications with an emphasis on new media, and wrote my thesis on essentially fake news and how you can use different kind of nonverbal cues, because social media is very much a nonverbal communication aspect. How you can use hashtags, hyperlinks, pictures, videos, etc., to increase your credibility in a sense in each of these social posts, and how if you have the right combination, that increases, again, your credibility. And I've kind of forgotten some of this because it's been a number of years since I've written my thesis. But it was really interesting because I was writing this right when, right during and after kind of fake news was a really big thing. And again, I tied it into art in the sense I looked at and culture, because how social media was used during the Arab Spring, and how social media was used from a grassroots fundraising and political aspect. I think that is the really interesting thing about social media, is that it is so intersectional in all of these different avenues of life, as we've seen over the past, I'd say 5 years. And it's truly fascinating to see how that change occurs. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings on each of the social platforms. I think that there are pros and cons, good and evil to everything, but it is a tool, especially now during a pandemic, of how we can connect and how we can communicate and how we can, still have that social experience with people when we are more isolated. And the same with gaming. Gaming, very much is a tool for people to socialize and connect right now. But all of that, going back to, kind of how I got to where I am.
If you wanted to continue on that train of thought, I'm strapped in and ready. So I'm fine with it. I was completely up to you.
I feel like I am all over the place, but to kind of go back to what you were asking, I really feel like my varied experience is helpful for what I do, because I've been exposed to a lot of different things. And I know there is the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, but having varied experiences, I do think, is helpful in today's society and career world, when no one is ever truly such a specialist anymore. I think that being able to, for what I do, social media, I need to understand the platforms where the content creators are talking about their streams or posting their content. I need to understand the best practices and stay up with that, because that's where they are existing and that's where they're communicating and that's where they're producing their content. At the same time, my legal background, even though it was only a year, having a basic understanding of contracts and negotiations is helpful, especially when you start to, talk with content creator management, because let's face it, the field has gotten a lot more advanced and people do have representation and agencies that are working for them in this regard. And so in that sense, I think that's very helpful. I think that my art history background is also very helpful too, because how do you analyze and dissect and talk about, and what are you communicating in this content, whether it is video or whether it's still? How do you judge what is a good piece of content? How do you judge what is a good piece of user-generated content that you want to repost on a company's social media? All of these skills, that I think is really beneficial to me, because having all of these varied experiences have coalesced into the background that I have that I feel makes me successful at what I do.
Awesome. Hey, it's very interesting, like the journey. I feel like you and I are around the same age, like the journey from growing up to going to school, going through college, going through the master's program. And so my background is in marketing and communications. And when I graduated, it was like, okay, so I'm going to go work at some type of, marketing firm. And then social media took off and I'm like, oh, well, there goes that. So it's like, what do I do now? And, shifting for me, I shifted from marketing communications to working in IT, and I was doing IT for about a decade until recently, where I was like, all right, I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. So let me move over to contracting. And I was like, oh, that's not for me. And I did a little stint with legal as well. I was like, yeah, not for me. But it's interesting, in all those fields that I dabbled in, similar to you, it all coalesces into the next thing, that we're doing within the gaming sphere. And it's amazing to look at that. It's like, wow, that wasn't useless after all, or that actually came back to be very, very useful.
No, it's very true. And, going back to what I said earlier about, not having necessarily any professional gaming experience up until I got my job with Logitech G. I got the I told you so to my mom, where, see, all of the hours that I put into playing video games was useful for something. Because again, in today's society, it is much less about those traditional, I have a degree in this, I have a degree in this, therefore I get this career. It is much more, I look at, there are so many different people that I think are reinforcing that there are so many different ways to get to where you want to go. And there is no blueprint for any one particular career. It's, do you bring passion? Do you bring knowledge? Do you bring experience that makes you successful?
So this makes me want to ask, because I work frequently with University of Hawaii out here. Can we have you come out here and speak to the students about this? Because man, I feel like there's so much wisdom that, and not only that you're sharing here, but that you could share to the students, because there's so many students out here that, both in the college, and also occasionally they'll have the high schools come over to the colleges for the, speaking for career day and stuff like that, where they're interested in the gaming industry, but because of the culture out here in Hawaii, gaming is very heavily frowned upon. There's the idea that there's no future in it. So typically career paths for people out here in Hawaii would be going into construction or working within the travel industry out here, or consumerism for the tourists that come here. Occasionally it's working with the hospitals too, because that's another high paying career field. But gaming, social media that is just not heavily looked upon. And it's one of the reasons why for me going into being a content creator, being growing up here in Hawaii was seeing that there wasn't really other content creators out here, or very few that are actually doing anything in gaming. I'm like, okay, so why is that? How can I be an agent of change to help, bridge that gap between, not only myself and the companies, but other people who may have an interest in working in gaming, be it, as a content creator or working with the industry itself. Several of my friends are actually, they're working at Nintendo or Bandai Namco, and they're all from here. And it's crazy. Like growing up, we never thought it, that would be a thing, because the idea of being from Hawaii is that can't happen. So yeah, I would love to have you talk to Giselle.
That is one of the things, and this is really one from multiple different aspects of representation. I think it's really helpful. And I would be honored to, obviously post pandemic when travel is a little easier, I would be honored to come out and to speak to some of the students.
Definitely. So one of the things I definitely want to touch on as far as like social media, and also being respectful of your time, because I know we got a few minutes left, but as far as social media, when it comes to like content creators and influencers, so this is how I am, and this is just to set the tone for it. With how I approach, individuals in the gaming industry or tech companies or various brands that I work with, like, you get to see me authentically as I am. I'm just, a goofy Polynesian out here, but also the business aspect of how, if I work with you, this is what you're going to get. Like, I'm going to give 110%. I do try to stay away from controversy and whatnot, but I want to know how, in your opinion, it is for, like, how should a content creator approach being authentically themselves, but being able to be, brand approachable? Like, a brand doesn't have to take risks like, oh, okay, you're a red flag. No.
I definitely think there is no, I'll put it this way, there is no easy answer to this question, because there are going to be certain brands that do have a higher or lower risk tolerance that, even you as your authentic self and trying to be brand safe might not be a fit for them, or might not be a fit for them at the time. So I do think something important for any content creator to realize is that the timing has to work from both sides. Right. So even though you get a no at one point, or even though you get a yes, that may change later on, because people may decide, hey, we're going to go in a different direction, or hey, different things come up. So that is something important to remember, like other creative industries, whether, I look at, acting or modeling or writing or photography or anything like that. There's always going to be an element of rejection, and it is part of the industry, and that's okay. The important thing is to always try to be learning, always trying to be refining, and also staying true to yourself, because you might be approached by a brand and you might not feel comfortable working with that brand, because you might feel, hey, I would have to tone down who I am, or hey, this is associating me with something I'm not comfortable with. It goes both ways. And so that's important to remember, is that you need to weigh not only how do you make yourself brand approachable, but what brands do you want to align with?
Right. And one of the things, like, oftentimes I'll work with other content creators. I either collab with them, doing video editing and whatnot, or, I'll have bigger and smaller creators reach out like, oh, how did you work with this company? Like, who's your contact? Like, how did you get this? How do you get that? And, sometimes, more often than not, I'll be told like, oh, this brand turned me down, so I reach out again. And I'll say, going back to what you said, like, one, always learn. And that's also learning from yourself. Like, okay, what could I have done better in this situation? But also, when it comes to working with companies, if they say no, that doesn't mean no forever. That means probably not right now. But if there's a product that they have or a service that they have and you're passionate about it, I've always told people, still cover it. Still, you know, if you're a content creator that does reviews, if it's a service or product, still cover it, because they still see that. And it still goes a long way, because that could come up down the road.
I think that is absolutely great feedback to give someone, because again, you know, speaking as far as what I do, but also what I am familiar with other brands doing, we do go back and look. You know, we do go back and look at what your social media is. And, you know, I'll use a hypothetical situation. If someone reaches out and gets a no, and then goes on social media and publicly trashes a company, well, that no is more than likely going to stay a no. Whereas if you get a no and you learn from, hey, what can I improve on? What can I do better as a creator? How can I improve my skills? And you don't necessarily burn that bridge, you know, that again, that no could turn into a yes later on when there is a better fit for a particular product, or there is a just better fit for an overall program. So I think that advice that you give people is very valuable. And so calling that out, very good advice.
So what are your thoughts on like social media etiquette? Like, do you feel like there is a certain way like people should conduct themselves, like I guess creators, in a professional sense, or like, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think this goes back to understanding who you are as a person, what your personal values are, what your personal morals and ethics are. Because at the same time, you don't necessarily want to censor yourself to where you feel like you're being inauthentic. So again, I think that it's a very fine line. It's going to vary from person to person what you feel comfortable with. I think, again, it's important to understand that not everybody is going to be a fit for every brand. And that's speaking very hypothetically. I'll use myself as an example. While I might be a fit for a company that is related to art in some way, given my background, I'm not as in the know currently. So you're not always going to be a fit at every one point.
Right. So, you know, winding down, because I know we've got a couple of minutes left, but what is a typical day like for Giselle? Like, what happens on a daily? Like, walk us through that.
I wish I could say there was a typical day, but it varies. You know, it varies depending on what we have coming up, what point in the month I'm in, where we're at in our fiscal year. So I think it's a varied experience. I will say, if anybody is ever curious about creator relations, highly recommend checking out internships and whatnot, because it's a great way to get that behind the scenes look that I can't necessarily talk about on a podcast and whatnot. But no, it's very varied. I will interact with a lot of different people, be it internal or external, and content creators or agents, managers, lawyers, etc. It's also, you know, I will say one of the fun things I get to do that tends to be more that surprise and delight moment is, you know, occasionally putting together gift boxes and care packages for content creators we work with, just because it's those personal moments that I really enjoy. And how we've really tried to build our program is being much more friendly and approachable, because we want people to collaborate with us. And that isn't necessarily, you know, that's the non-NDA answer and whatnot. But no, that is something that I'm very proud about. The work that I get to do is that we really do value the relationships we have. We want to nurture those, and we want to collaborate with people, because we really believe life is more fun when you play, and we want to make play more accessible.
That's definitely something I've seen with, you know, on both the front and back end. I've seen a lot of, you know, with the social media for Logitech G, like how you guys are with your creators and how, you know, you interact with people on social media. Is definitely very welcoming and inclusive, and I love that. And, you know, for a lot of my friends that are partnered with you guys, like, nothing but glowing remarks, and it's just,
I love hearing that. I love hearing that too, just in the sense, and this is my very diplomatic answer in the sense that all of the creators that we work with are my favorite, because I feel like the community that we've built and nurtured is very different in background and experience, but again, unifies around this idea that life is more fun when you play, and they want to have a good time, and they want to enjoy things, and they want to come together and share that love of gaming. And that to me is so refreshing and exciting when I get to have conversations with them and whatnot. I really miss conventions right now, because there are so many great memories that I have of going to conventions and hanging out with content creators and different stories from that it is one of the true highlights and joys of what I get to do.
Awesome. And hopefully maybe in the next year or two, we might get conventions again.
Fingers crossed.
Right. Like I definitely miss going to conventions, because like 2019 was the first year that I actually got to go to majority of all the major conventions, from E3 to PAX, and I got flown there by like PDP to each one, and it was like the first year where I'm like, wow, I'm a Hawaii creator that's actually getting to do this. Like, you don't hear about that, and it's like, oh yeah, 2020 happened.
But it's also so great that you got to have those experiences, and obviously no one really got to have those experiences this year, but two, that you get to tell that story, because it does show that, I feel like a lot of people will get discouraged early on in pursuing anything in gaming, because they're, to your point, they'll either say, oh, I'm from, this area, or I don't have a shot at doing this, or they'll kind of mentally put themselves out of the game. And it's important to remember you shouldn't do that. Again, you might get rejected from brands you want to work with at a particular time, but keep working at it, keep striving for it, because I really do feel like if you are passionate about something, you have to put in the work. Yes. And putting in that work gets you noticed, and it opens up new opportunities. And it's important to remember that people are working to see change in this industry, and it's important to keep striving for that.
Yeah. Like anything worth having is worth fighting for, worth improving and working hard to achieve. And, with a lot of the creators that I do get to work with and interact with and be friends with out here, and I keep prefacing here because like I want to see more Hawaii content creators, more Polynesian creators that are, up there, doing great things. And it's just trying to get past that barrier of, my family said there's no future in it. Like, no, the old way of this is it is not the way anymore. There's so much opportunity, and sometimes it's so frustrating to me.
Again, I think about, when I was in, like I said, the second grade, and I was told by my teacher, 50% of you in this classroom will have jobs that do not exist right now. Mm-hmm. And I think about that now. And when we look at, any exponential growth in anything, it is truly remarkable to see that just uptick in that curve. And that applies to the gaming space, and that applies to all of these different industries. And we just have to keep reminding ourselves that there are going to be opportunities that do not exist right now for us currently. Again, I'm using my personal background. Mm-hmm. If you had told me, 20 years ago that I would be doing what I'm doing now, and these are all of the steps that I'd have to go through, but all of these steps, even though they might have originally be taking me down a different path, would get me to where I am, I would have said, I don't see it. And it's important to not lose sight of the fact that there are going to be those opportunities that we can't even comprehend right now that are going to come up.
Right. Two final questions I want to ask you. One, well, actually, it's two questions in one. But how often are you getting an opportunity to game right now, and are you able to stream regularly?
I was streaming regularly. That being said, I do feel like I've taken a bit of a break from that over the last, I would say, 3-4 weeks, just from a mental health perspective. Part of the reason why I started streaming was I felt like I was missing out on that social element. So it was giving me an opportunity to game and engage. I get to do a lot of gaming. I will say that, whether it is mobile gaming, Pokemon Go. It was Pokemon Go community day last weekend, so I was definitely out doing that. To playing Sims at night to wind down. Previously, before that, it was Animal Crossing New Horizon. I think that, for me, I keep reminding myself that, again, part of the reason why I did start streaming was I wanted to be better at my job and understanding what content creators are going through. But if the idea of being on camera and being on in that sense is going to create more stress and pressure on myself, that's counterproductive to me, because at the end of the day, it is better for me to feel rested and happy and healthy mentally than try to put pressure on myself to be as, regular as I previously was. I would love to start streaming more regularly again. I think right now, though, just for me personally, I'm kind of enjoying being off a little bit, especially as we gear up for kind of fun things to come with Logitech G.
Okay. No, I perfectly understand what you're saying as far as like streaming and the mental health aspect. I'm very, very big on being a mental health advocate, because streaming and just being in the gaming atmosphere, the gaming industry, that mental health can be draining. It can take a toll. I do a lot of stuff with, I'm actually one of the ambassadors for Saving Our World. And, I personally had to take some time off from streaming because it's draining. It takes a toll. And it's like, a lot of people think, oh, you're just hitting go live and, and everything is easy. And it's like, no, you have to deal with technical issues. You have to deal with trolls. You have to make sure your community is good. Your mods are doing their thing. And you have to focus on the game. You got to be entertaining. And it is a lot.
And I will do one shameless plug in this sense. I also feel like part of the reason why I'm not streaming as much right now is because, and if anybody follows Logitech G, you will have seen this on social media. We are doing a creator spotlight series each month and doing charity engagement and donations each month for different charities. I am one of the people moderating on those. So I feel like, in working to set those up, to coordinate with content creators that are very graciously donating their time to come and support these causes, that also, adds an element to that stress and being on, because I am on stream. You just might not see my face. And so I think that's also part of it too, because I really feel, again, very fortunate to work with a company that is striving to make change. And I think that, supporting those causes right now, we're highlighting creators of color with our Black History Month streams and supporting the Loveland Foundation, who work to provide therapy funds and help communities in need, specifically Black women and girls. So I'm so passionate about that. But again, it's taking a little bit more of my energy that normally I might have put into my own stream.
Okay. And is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we go?
I highly recommend you check out our Creator Spotlight series on the Logitech G Twitch and Facebook. They're a great way to see the community of creators that we work with at Logitech G to support great causes, as well as just come out and get to hang out with different creators and be exposed to different creators that you might not necessarily know about. Again, shameless plug. There is one tonight with Miss Ash Rocks. It's going to be at 7 p.m. Pacific time, if I remember correctly, off the top of my head. So it's a great way, for you to come and see our channel, but also to get exposure to a content creator you might not be familiar with.
Awesome. I lied. I actually have one final question for you. Did you have fun?
I had a blast, and if you would be willing to have me, I would be honored to come back. We have to have more of an in-depth discussion on Dragon Age and Final Fantasy and whatnot. I feel like those franchises in and of themselves, we could spend hours talking about.
Exactly. It would be an honor to have you back on again. I would love to have you back on the show. Dragon Age, Final Fantasy. We could talk about Tomb Raider. There's a lot there. There's a lot we could talk about, and I would love to have you back on again. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on the show. And go ahead. There's no shameless plugs, but tell everyone where they can find you.
Again, you can find me on Twitch and Twitter at GGFirefly, and I'm ggfirefly.tv on Instagram. My Instagram is definitely a little less gaming focused, but I always enjoy meeting new people, talking about games, and yeah.
Awesome. And I'll leave links to all of Giselle's outlets down below, as well as Logitech G as well. And you can find this episode of the podcast, along with many others, on every podcasting outlet, from Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and recently we just got added to Amazon Music. And with that being said, I hope you guys have a great one. I hope you learned a lot and you enjoyed this. And we can't wait to have Giselle back on the show. But this is Mikkel and Giselle. We are signing out. You guys have a great one.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope it was informative, engaging, and you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure you go ahead and leave a rating and a review. It greatly helps out the podcast and helps the platforms that we're on go ahead and promote us more so that more people can check it out. And if you're wondering what all platforms we're on, aside from what you've listened to it on, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. And if you want to support the podcast, then we've got Patreon, so patreon.com/Mikkel Kasanova, which allows us to continue doing what we're doing. If you're looking for this in video format, we're also available on twitch.tv/Mikkel Kasanova, as well as youtube.com/Mikkel Kasanova. So with all that being said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast and the #1 podcast in the Pacific, the Kasanova Podcast. You have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.